In the vast deserts of Egypt, where silence stretches farther than the horizon, and the sky becomes both shelter and witness, the Christian life assumed forms of radical simplicity. The 4th and 5th centuries gave rise to men and women who withdrew from cities not to escape the world, but to seek God without distraction. Among these ascetics stood Bessarion, later remembered as the Great, whose life unfolded beneath the open sky. He did not found cities, compose treatises, or lead councils. His authority emerged from endurance, vigilance, and a discipline that pressed the body into obedience to the soul. What remains of his memory survives largely through the sayings of the Desert Fathers. These brief accounts do not offer detailed chronology, yet they reveal a life shaped by baptismal grace, pilgrimage, silence, and humility that left a lasting impression upon the desert tradition. Bessarion was baptized while still young, and from that moment he sought to guard the grace he had received. Baptism was not treated as a formality or social belonging. It became the axis around which his life would turn, shaping every subsequent decision. Desiring to understand the fullness of monastic life, he undertook a pilgrimage to the holy places. He traveled to Jerusalem, walking where generations of believers had prayed, and he continued into the wilderness beyond the Jordan. There he encountered established monastic communities and learned from their discipline. He visited St. Gerasimus in the Jordanian desert and observed how structured obedience and prayer sustained those who had renounced ordinary life. These journeys were not driven by curiosity alone. Bessarion studied the rules of the desert, absorbing the rhythms of fasting, vigil, and restraint. The pilgrimage served as preparation, not conclusion. Upon returning from the holy places, he embraced monastic tonsure. The decision marked a permanent break with previous attachments and aligned him fully with the ascetic vocation he had contemplated during his travels. He became a disciple of Saint Isidore of Pelusium, placing himself under spiritual direction. This submission to guidance anchored his zeal within obedience, preventing fervor from turning into self-will. Under Isidore's oversight, Bessarion deepened his discipline. The desert was not romanticized. It was understood as a place where the soul confronts its own instability and learns endurance through sustained prayer. Gradually, his life took on increasing severity. The habits he had observed during pilgrimage became personal practice. Silence, restraint, and watchfulness shaped his daily conduct. Thus the foundations of his reputation were laid. Before miracles were remembered and sayings preserved, there was a young monk determined to preserve the grace of baptism through steady, uncompromising ascetic effort. Saint Bessarion embraced a vow of silence, restraining speech so that prayer might grow uninterrupted. Words were used sparingly, and only when necessity required. The desert itself became his language, its stillness shaping the interior quiet he sought to preserve. He partook of food only once a week, training his body to accept limitation without complaint. Hunger was not pursued for display, but as discipline, aligning physical desire with spiritual vigilance. Tradition recounts that at times he remained without food or drink for 40 days. Such endurance echoed biblical patterns familiar to the desert tradition, yet in his case it was undertaken without proclamation or demand for recognition. On one occasion he stood motionless in prayer for 40 days and 40 nights, abstaining from sleep and nourishment. The account is preserved with restraint, reflecting how the Desert Fathers recorded such feats as testimony rather than embellishment. Bessarion rejected shelter and slept under the open sky, exposed to heat and cold. He wore simple garments, accepting discomfort as constant companion. The desert wind and sun became part of his discipline. He never lay down to rest, choosing instead to sleep standing or seated. This practice symbolized alertness of soul, guarding against spiritual negligence, even in moments of physical exhaustion. A large portion of his life unfolded without permanent dwelling. He wandered through the desert expanses, remaining unattached to any single cell for long periods, embodying a radical dependence upon God's providence. This severity was not hostility toward the body, but ordered restraint. The aim was clarity of heart. Through silence, fasting, and exposure, he sought to remove obstacles that clouded prayer. Those who encountered him perceived both austerity and steadiness. His discipline was consistent, neither fluctuating with mood nor shaped by circumstance. The desert became witness to a life committed entirely to vigilance. Though Bessarion concealed himself in silence and austerity, accounts preserved in the desert tradition record that he received the gift of wonder-working. These signs did not interrupt his ascetic discipline. They emerged quietly within the same life of restraint and vigilance. When one of his disciples suffered intense thirst and encountered only bitter water, Bessarion prayed, and the water became sweet. The act was remembered not as spectacle, but as pastoral care exercised within the harsh conditions of the wilderness. On another occasion, rain fell upon parched land through his prayer. The desert, accustomed to long dryness, received relief in response to supplication offered without display. The event strengthened those who witnessed it, reinforcing trust in divine providence. Tradition also recounts that he crossed a river as though walking on dry ground. The image evokes biblical memory, yet the Desert Fathers transmitted the account without dramatization, presenting it as one more sign granted within hidden ascetic life. He cast out demons with a single word, though he took care to avoid attention. Spiritual authority, in his case, did not seek acknowledgement. The restraint he applied to speech extended even to the exercise of miraculous power. Despite such gifts, humility remained central to his character. Once, when a priest ordered a monk to leave the church for having fallen into sin, Bessarion rose and departed with him, declaring simply, "I am a sinner too." This gesture revealed the core of his sanctity. Authority in the desert was inseparable from self-accusation. He did not separate himself from the weakness of others, even when widely regarded as spiritually advanced. His miracles were never detached from compassion. Whether sweetening water, invoking rain, or consoling the fallen, each act flowed from interior humility rather than ambition or desire for reputation. Thus his name endured among the Desert Fathers, not solely because of extraordinary signs, but because those signs were anchored in silence, restraint, and unwavering self-knowledge before God. Saint Bessarion spent much of his life beneath the open sky, without cell, without roof, and without fixed dwelling. The desert itself became his monastery. Sand, wind, and horizon framed his prayer, while the vastness above him remained constant witness to his vigilance. Years passed in this pattern of wandering and stillness. He did not seek position or leadership, nor did he gather disciples intentionally. Those who followed him did so because they perceived in his endurance a clarity rarely encountered in ordinary life. His discipline did not soften with age. Even as strength gradually declined, he preserved the habits that had shaped his youth. Simplicity of clothing, restraint in food, and guarded speech continued until the end of his earthly course. The Desert Fathers remembered him as one who despised bodily comfort, yet this severity was directed toward purification rather than harshness. The goal remained communion with God, pursued through unwavering watchfulness. He slept standing or seated, refusing the ease of reclining rest. Exposure to heat and cold was accepted without complaint. These practices, repeated over decades, formed a life defined by interior steadiness rather than outward achievement. Those who preserved his memory emphasized his humility more than his endurance. The man who could sweeten water and summon rain considered himself equal to the sinner dismissed from the church. This posture safeguarded his spiritual authority. In advanced age, he departed peacefully to the Lord. No dramatic final scene is recorded. The tradition speaks simply of repose, consistent with the restraint that marked his entire life. His memory endured through brief sayings and recollections woven into the wider desert tradition. The absence of elaborate biography reflects the very character of his vocation, hidden, austere, and stripped of unnecessary detail. Saint Bessarion stands among the great ascetics of Egypt as witness to a life sustained by silence and vigilance. Beneath the open sky, he demonstrated that steadfast endurance, joined to humility, can shape a sanctity that echoes across generations. Saint Bessarion's life reminds us that sanctity does not always unfold in cities, council, or public teaching. Beneath the vast Egyptian sky, through silence, fasting, and humility, he preserved the grace of his baptism with unwavering discipline. His memory endures not through monuments, but through the quiet authority of a life entirely offered to God. If reflections like this help you rediscover the depth of the desert tradition and the strength found in hidden faithfulness, you are warmly invited to subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you help continue the remembrance of those whose silent endurance still speaks across the centuries.